Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Peloponnesos in the south of Greece on August 2nd, 2025 for Reason to Resist. I'm driving from Athens to my home in Kalamata, Greece, on the southern coast of Greece. Split my time nowadays between Montreal, Canada and Kalamata. I've been away from Greece for a couple of months. And as I'm alone in the vehicle and had some time to spare, I thought I'd take the opportunity to rant about the two-state delusion. Why do I call it a two-state delusion? Well, let me explain. First of all, and I say this as somebody who was in the occupied West Bank last year, and prior to that I was in the occupied West Bank in 2016, so I've been there twice in the past decade. I got a tour of the West Bank. I was in Hebron, Bethlehem, the city of Jenin, the city of Nablus, the Jenin refugee camp, the largest refugee camp in the West Bank, also in the refugee camp of Tulkarm, and one or two other smaller refugee camps. This was all last year. And because I visited twice in the past 2 years, I have had an opportunity to get a sense of the growth of Israel's illegal settlements. They constitute, in fact, war crimes. And the growth has been dramatic. They were already quite extensive in 2016, but when I went back in 2024, I was amazed at the degree to which they now dominated the landscape in the West Bank. And at the time that I was there, in the first half of last year, the Israeli genocide forces had been committing atrocities in Jenin and Tulkarm on an almost daily basis, but the people were still living there. Since then, they have been, my understanding is, by speaking to people in the West Bank, almost entirely displaced from Jenin, which as I mentioned, is the largest refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. And there has been, I think, tens of thousands of people in the occupied West Bank, Palestinians who've been displaced from their homes by the Israeli military and by the criminal, violent, fanatical settlers who carry out pogroms now on an almost daily basis. So you have in the occupied West Bank an estimated 800,000 illegal Israeli settlers, and they are, for the most part, heavily armed. They are racist, they are violent to the core, fanatical, and they believe it is their God-given right to settle in the West Bank and to remain there and to take exclusive control of the West Bank. And it seems impossible to imagine that they could be removed from the West Bank with anything other than military force, which could provoke a civil war. And there's no indication whatsoever that the Israeli authorities, or anybody else for that matter, other than the Palestinians themselves and their supporters in the Arab and Muslim world, have any kind of an appetite for expelling those criminal settlers from the West Bank, who have the full backing of the Israeli army, which is obviously much better armed than any resistance groups in historic Palestine. So how could you possibly imagine having any kind of a viable state in circumstances such as those? And if they're not going to leave, there's really no point in even having a discussion about the West Bank becoming the epicenter of some kind of a new Palestinian state. Now, the other part of the Palestinian state was supposed to be the Gaza Strip, of course, and as the world has witnessed over the past 22 months, Israel has systematically destroyed the Gaza Strip. It is now completely unlivable. Excuse me while I pay a toll. Ευχαριστώ. Probably at this stage, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been massacred by the genocidal Israeli entity. Contamination, unexploded munitions, raw sewage everywhere. Many of the people, at this stage, probably most of the people in the Gaza Strip have been so traumatized and so weakened, so beset by illnesses, preventable disease, that they would require intensive care far beyond the levels they received prior to the genocidal rampage, just to have any hope of being normal functioning members of some kind of a society. So just on the basis of the physical conditions in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, it's impossible for any objective, rational observer to imagine that a viable state could be constructed there at this stage. And even if that could be done, a state along the 1967 borders, this would constitute something like 20% of historic Palestine, and the population, the Palestinian population of historic Palestine, depending upon how many Palestinians the genocidal entity has murdered, is either slightly more or slightly less than 50%. So no one's ever explained why the Palestinian people who are indigenous to this land should be content with 20%. As I've said many times, the two-state solution, the one envisioned by the so-called international community along the 1967 borders, would be an absolutely fantastic deal for Israel. And Israel doesn't deserve to have any state at this stage. And nonetheless, they're not even prepared, the Israelis, to give the Palestinians that much. But even if they were, how could it be done, practically speaking, given the conditions that now persist in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip? And of course, the reason why those conditions persist is because Western governments, the same ones who claim ad nauseum to be supporters of the two-state solution, have armed Israel to the teeth, given Israel economic support, trade benefits, protection in international institutions like the ICC, the UN Security Council, throughout the time that Israel has been expanding its illegal settlements. So although they've claimed repeatedly and until they're blue in the face and with solemn intonations to be supporters of the two-state solution, in fact, these Western charlatans have done everything conceivable and have been quite successful at it to completely destroy any prospect of a two-state solution. So that's in large part why I say this so-called solution is nothing but a delusion. And in fact, the very people who claim to support it the most emphatically, namely Western governments, have done everything to destroy it. And quite apart from all of that, Netanyahu, the criminal, has openly declared that his regime has absolutely no interest in giving the Palestinians any kind of a state. And in fact, the Israeli Knesset just adopted a non-binding motion for the annexation of the West Bank. And as a legal matter, domestic legal matter, Israel has already, many years ago, purported to annex, in violation of international law, East Jerusalem, which was supposed to have been reserved by the international community to be the capital of a new Palestinian state. So there's that too. And of course, in East Jerusalem, you have many fanatical settlers protected by the Israeli military. So that too would impose a considerable obstacle to Jerusalem serving as the capital of a Palestinian state. So who are we kidding here, folks? So nonetheless, all these characters assembled to discuss, some of them well-meaning. I must say that, you know, a lot of the people who participated in this conference at the end of July, a lot of the governments actually do want to see a Palestinian state realized alongside an Israeli state. But frankly, even the ones who are sincere in wanting to see that, certainly no Western government is sincere in that regard. I think that's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. But the non-Western governments who are sincere, I don't think they're being particularly realistic. None of them has actually laid out a plan for how you are going to build a Palestinian state, given the conditions now prevailing in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, and given the fierce, fanatical opposition of the entire Israeli political elite and the vast majority of the Israeli Jewish population to the creation of any kind of a Palestinian state. Okay, so they gather, and what happens? Well, a group of 22 Western states and the Arab League, all of whose members are now run by Western puppets, signed a statement, and it's called the New York Declaration. And the New York Declaration envisions the creation of a demilitarized Palestinian state. And it condemns the October 7th attacks and calls upon the Hamas, demands really that Hamas lay down its arms and turn over the administration of the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority. And, we have been told again ad nauseum that what the Western states want to see is the development of democracy in occupied Palestine. They never mention the fact, of course, that the last time there were elections in occupied Palestine, Hamas won those elections, and by a considerable margin. And then the United States and other Western countries and the collaborationist Palestinian Authority and the Israeli genocidal entity conspired to deprive Hamas of its victory by force of arms. And that's how you ended up with this division in the rule. In fact, the results of those elections, which international election observers certified as legitimate, should have conferred upon Hamas rule over the entirety of the occupied territories, including the West Bank, but they ended up only with the Gaza Strip. So that was the last time the Palestinian people expressed their will democratically. And what happened? The West and their Israeli rabid attack dog crushed the democratic aspirations of the Palestinian people. Now you may wonder, what is the current feeling amongst the Palestinian people? Let me tell you. There's an organization called the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, a reputable organization in occupied Palestine that periodically polls the attitudes of Palestinians living under occupation. And the last poll that they did, according to my research, was in May of this year. And let me tell you about their results. They were asked, the Palestinians, both in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, their satisfaction levels with various Palestinian actors. The total level across both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip was 57% for Hamas, 24% for Fatah, the party of Mahmoud Abbas, 23% for the Palestinian Authority, and 15% for Mahmoud Abbas. So that was in May of this year. The Palestinian people were also asked, those living under occupation, how would you vote if a presidential election were held between three candidates, first being Marwan Barghouti, who has been languishing in an Israeli hellhole for, I believe, 20 plus years, and is basically, as I understand his political orientation, not aligned decisively either with Hamas or Fatah, but really prepared to work with both sides and with other factions as well. So that was one of the candidates in this question the pollsters put to the Palestinian people. The second of the three candidates was Khalid Mishal of Hamas, and the third was Mahmoud Abbas. And what the poll discovered was that 64% said that they would vote the turnout would be 64%, that the vote for Marwan Barghouti would be 58%, and the vote for Khalid Mishal would be 35%, and Mahmoud Abbas would get a lowly 11%. 11%. So these Arab puppets, these corrupt, autocratic, anti-Palestinian charlatans who've aligned with Western states and who claim to want to see the democratic aspirations of the Palestinian people fulfilled, by demanding that the Palestinian Authority assume power. They don't have legitimacy in any part of historic Palestine, this organization, because of the results of the last election in Palestine. But, conferring control over the entirety of the occupied territories, or at least nominal control, because it wouldn't be real control, on the Palestinian Authority would be profoundly violative of the democratic will of the Palestinian people. You better just going to pay my toll. 1 second.
Να ενημερώσουμε ότι σε 12 χιλιόμετρα η δεξιά λωρίδα του δρόμου είναι κλειστή.
Κλειστή, λοιπόν, τι πρέπει να κάνω?
Θα πάτε στην αριστερή λωρίδα.
Αλλά μπορώ να πάω.
Δύο δρόμους που βλέπετε με τη διαχωριστική, η δεξιά πλευρά είναι κλειστή, η αριστερή κινείται.
Αλλά μπορώ να πάω μέχρι Καλαμάτα.
Ναι, καλέ.
Εντάξει.
Αυτός είναι ο δρόμος.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Γεια σας. Now, some other interesting data from this poll. People were asked. Now, as I mentioned, the New York Declaration is demanding that Hamas disarm. Gee, I wonder how the Palestinian people feel about that. Well, this poll done in May of this year found that 77% are opposed to Hamas disarming, and only 18% said yes. So the proportion of those who opposed disarmament was approximately 4-1, and a small number didn't express a view. And people were also asked, if Hamas disarms, did they believe that the war would end and that Israel would withdraw from the Gaza Strip? 80% said no, and only 17% said yes. People were surveyed on the question of whether, as to who they thought would win the war. The war in the Gaza Strip, of course. And 43% said Hamas, 15% said Israel, and 32% said neither or they don't know. And people were also asked whether they thought that the October 7th attacks were correct. 50% said yes. This is both, all these numbers I've given you are across both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So 50% of Palestinians living in occupation said that the October 7th attacks were correct. 40% said no, and 13% said they didn't know. And that, by the way, was the lowest number, I think. The 50% figure was the lowest number since polling began during or after the genocide was launched. The percentage who thought that the October 7th attacks were correct was substantially higher in prior polls. Not surprising, given the rapidly deteriorating conditions in the Gaza Strip over the course of the past 22 months of satanic Israeli horror. So, by any rational measure, the demands of this cabal of pro-genocide charlatans, the signatories of the New York Declaration, that that Hamas disarm and relinquish control of the Gaza Strip to the Mahmoud Abbas-led Palestinian Authority would violate the democratic will of the Palestinian people six ways from Sunday. No doubt about it. But they don't care. This is just one more demonstration that the West and its various puppets, Washington and its various puppets, could not care less about the democratic aspirations of the Palestinian people. In fact, we've seen that they don't care about their lives. They don't care about their children. They don't care about the livability of their communities. Why would they care about their democratic aspirations? I mean, please give me a break. Now, I want to say something else about this demand that Hamas disarm. Hamas, the word Hamas, when it comes out of the mouth of a Western politician or a corporate media hack, Israeli code. We need to understand this. It's a word that has been infused with our worst conceptions of, human barbarism because of, decades of indoctrination in the West. Much of the criticism that has been directed at Hamas was justified, but a great deal of it has also been either hyperbole or outright fabrication. And the totality of it has caused people to, of course, in the West, overwhelmingly associate, at least this was the case before the genocide, and in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of October 7th, to associate the word Hamas with the worst forms of barbarism. Now, whatever your views of Hamas may be, it's important to understand that when Israel and its backers say Hamas, they're not just talking about Hamas. They're talking about all resistance groups. It's vitally important to understand this. They never say this. They're never asked to explain. For example, a simple question, any journalist who is interested in ascertaining what the true position of these pro-genocide charlatans actually is with respect to Palestinian resistance groups, they would ask a question like this. Well, if Hamas disarms, but the other Palestinian resistance groups were to remain armed, would you be content with that? And you can be sure that if that question were asked, it's never asked, but the answer would be no, a definitive no. We would not be content with that. So it's essential to understand they're not just talking about Hamas. In fact, they're not just talking about resistance groups that have been designated as terrorist organizations by Israel in the West, and pretty much all of them have been. But there are perhaps a few exceptions. They're talking about all of them, whether or not they have been designated as terrorist organizations. And how do I know this? That they would not tolerate any form of armed resistance, even if it were directed exclusively at Israel's military personnel, security forces, and the armed, violent settlers. How do I know that they wouldn't tolerate that? Because they designate all of those attacks as acts of terrorism. You can read the Israeli press statements coming out of the Western political elite, the Israeli government, the Netanyahu regime. Any attack on any Israeli, even if it is an armed settler who is attacked, even if it is an armed Israeli soldier, who is in the process of oppressing the Palestinian people, even if it is, a representative, an agent of the Shin Bet, the Internal Security Services, the Mossad, doesn't matter. Anytime an Israeli, whoever it may be, is targeted with force by a resistance group, any resistance group, it is systematically characterized as terrorism, and therefore you can safely infer that Israel and its backers do not regard any form of Palestinian armed resistance as legitimate, as permissible. So they're calling for the disarmament of the entirety of the Palestinian resistance movement. And why does anybody think, and you've seen from these numbers, certainly the Palestinians aren't buying it, that if the Palestinians were not able to put up any kind of resistance, if they didn't have any capacity to defend themselves whatsoever, why would any rational human being think that Israel would refrain from attacking Palestinians? If there was no risk of harm being done to the Israeli aggressor, the rational expectation is that Israel would become even more violent towards the Palestinian people if they had no capacity to defend themselves. And that is their right under international law. And to suggest that people who are occupied and who have suffered what the Palestinian people have suffered have no right to defend themselves, that is, my friends, profoundly racist. That is a vile expression of dehumanization, of discounting the lives of Palestinians. Would we say that if we, Westerners, people of European origin, were living under the kind of occupation that Palestinians have had to endure, that we were obliged to endure it passively and didn't have the right to take up arms against our aggressor? Of course we would. And anybody who makes that claim, you can safely assume is an anti-Palestinian racist of the worst kind. So let us be very clear here where all of this is heading. If in fact the Palestinians lay down their arms and these Western governments and their Arab puppets get their way, the most likely outcome is that will expedite the extermination of the Palestinian people. And that's exactly where we're heading here. You know, if the Israelis get away with this, rather than there being a state rising from the ashes of the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, a demilitarized Palestinian state, which is what is being demanded, what is going to happen is that the murderous rampage that you have seen in Gaza over the past 22 months will then be perpetrated upon the Palestinians living in the West Bank. And they've already begun to do that, by the way. They've already prepared themselves, the Israelis. The military task for them, the task of exterminating Palestinians in the West Bank, is more complicated for the Israelis. That's why they've begun the genocidal rampage in Gaza. There it's relatively easy, even though they've failed to carry it out completely after nearly 2 years of savagery. It's relatively easy because you don't have Palestinians intermingled, or Palestinian communities intermingled with illegal Israeli settlements as you have in the West Bank. And the West Bank is also significantly larger than the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip is very flat, it's not forested, whereas the West Bank is hilly, parts of it are forested. So it presents more of a challenge, militarily speaking, than the Gaza Strip. So that's why they've started there. You have a concentration camp where the Palestinians have been trapped. The Israelis have complete dominance over the airspace and the borders. So they just, day after day after day, pummeling them, blocking the humanitarian aid from getting in. So once they've completed, I don't believe they will, by the way, let me be very clear about that, but the plan, in my view, is that once they've completed the extermination there, then they will proceed to exterminate the Palestinian population of the West Bank. And they've already begun the preparations for that by depopulating Jenin, which was a serious military challenge for them, and displacing the people there. And what they're doing in the West Bank now, in preparation for the next stage of the genocide, is they're concentrating the Palestinian population in smaller and smaller and fewer pockets by displacement. And so once they've satisfied themselves that they've finished half the Palestinian population, that there will be no consequences for doing that, and certainly that is the message which the West is sending in Technicolor to the Israeli satanic regime, then they will begin to complete the process of concentrating the population of the West Bank, the Palestinian population, in areas where they can be easily exterminated. And then if they do that, they will turn to East Jerusalem. There, the challenge is even greater because they don't want to destabilize the Israelis, the capital, what they regard as the capital of their demonic little entity. And you have an even more complicated intermingling of illegal Jewish settlers in East Jerusalem and the indigenous Palestinian population. But that'll be the next stage, the third stage of the genocidal project. And finally, if they get away with that, they will exterminate the Palestinian population of 1948 Israel itself, which constitutes about 20% of the population of Israel. That's what the ultimate objective is here, folks. And this so-called initiative to revive the two-state solution and the peace process is designed to do nothing more than distract us from the project, the genocidal project, its four-stage project, and to prolong the slaughter by causing us to think that there is progress being made, that we're moving towards a just outcome for the Palestinian people, when in fact, behind the scenes, or not so covertly, Israel is in fact advancing this 4-stage project for the extermination of all Palestinians living under occupation. That's why I call this nightmare the 2-state delusion.
Γεια σας.
Γεια σας. Ευχαριστώ. Now, I've only covered in a cursory way what happened at this UN-sponsored event that was co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. I mean, you know right away that the Palestinian people are going to be betrayed when it's a virtual certainty. It is a certainty when, you know, regimes like those of Macron and the Saudi Crown Prince are co-chairing this event. But I've only talked in a summary way about what happened at this event. I talked about the New York Declaration. You know, somebody who did a detailed breakdown of what transpired, a really excellent analysis of what transpired a couple of days ago is Ali Abunimah, the editor-in-chief of Electronic Intifada. And I'm going to put a link to Ali's 28-minute analysis in the description to this video. If you want to really understand what kind of a fraud this thing is, this entire initiative led by the Arab League and these 22 Western states, you really should listen to what Ali has to say. And as he concluded, don't allow yourselves to be distracted by this farce, this spectacle, this Monty Python, absurd comedy routine that we're seeing. You know, at this stage, they're taking us for fools. Those who claim that they, in the West and in the amongst the Arab autocracies who say that they are supportive of the 2-state solution, they're taking us for fools. You know, it's like you go to a used car dealership and you want to buy a car and you see this vehicle, it looks really good on the outside, very sleek, aerodynamic, and you ask the used car salesman to open up the hood, and lo and behold, when he opens it up, there's no motor inside. There's no engine at all. There's just a hole. And you look at the used car salesman and you say, dude, you told me that this is, the vehicle of my dreams and it doesn't even have an engine. And he says, don't worry about it. That's a minor detail. You'll be fine. But there's no motor in here, man. Trust me. Trust me, it'll all be good. This is the vehicle of your dreams. I mean, it's literally, that's how much they're treating us like fools. We are the sucker in the scenario that I've just described. And they are the used car salesmen. The arrogant, audacious used car salesmen who think that we can't, after, 50 plus years of Israel's settlement project. That's when it began. It began shortly after the 1967 war. We're talking about more than a half a century of settlement expansion, and throughout that time, no Western government, not a single one, imposed a meaningful sanction on Israel while purporting to be supportive of the 2-state solution. So if you are at this point inclined to believe them when they say that they support the 2-state solution, then as Malcolm X said, you are a chump, you're a sucker, and you're a damn fool. I hope that, and I believe that nobody in the audience listening to this rant, and none of the people who watch our program in Reason to Resist are going to be taken in by this kabuki theater. So folks, the fundamental message I have to share with you at the end of this rant is escalate the pressure. I know you hear that a lot from me, and I'm going to say it until I'm blue in the face. The singular focus of every person of conscience must be to end the genocide now. Don't pay any attention to this crap about the two-state solution. Hell, 3/4 of the world states, representing the vast majority of the human population, had recognized the state of Palestine before the genocide began. Did that deter Israel from carrying out these acts of unspeakable barbarism on a daily basis? No, not at all, not one iota. So why would adding a few Western states and some Arab autocracies to the lengthy list of nations that recognized the state of Palestine long ago change anything on the ground? The only thing that's going to change the reality on the ground is pressure, military pressure, and pressure from civil society, economic pressure, and really a combination of all of these things. And because the fact that they convened this conference and that you have Western states, as dishonest as they are, declaring that they will or may recognize the state of Palestine, is at least a manifestation of the pressure that they are feeling. They feel constrained to do this, something that they've resisted all these years, actually recognizing the state of Palestine. And the last thing I want to say about this, one of the ways in which this diabolical character Netanyahu, manipulates public opinion. The reason why Netanyahu has been in power for so long is really only one, I think, and that is he really understands how to manipulate public opinion in the West and in Israel itself. No one in Israeli politics does it better than he does. That's his singular talent. If he's a genius in any respect, it is in that respect that is a genius, in the manipulation of public opinion. And one of the ways that he does this is when, Western governments, do something that is of a purely cosmetic nature. They throw a few crumbs at the Palestinian people. They engage in some kind of theatrical display of concern for Palestinians. Frequently Netanyahu will blow his lid. And he's done that here. When Keir Starmer said he was going to maybe recognize the state of Palestine a few days ago, Netanyahu went berserk and started accusing, Starmer, who has the blood of Palestinian people, children all over him, not just on his hands, but right up to his neck, started accusing him of encouraging Hamas because he said he might recognize the state of Palestine in September. As strident as the commentary was, I think it was all just a charade. The reason why Netanyahu reacts in this way, it's not because he cares, but he wants you to think that he cares. Because if you think that he cares, then you're more likely to conclude that this is a meaningful initiative on the part of whatever Western government has announced it. So he's, in fact, what he's doing when he blows his stag, he's playing to his audience. He wants, his people in Israel to think he's a tough guy and he's standing up for Israel and Israel is a sovereign nation, when in fact it's just a rabid attack dog of Washington. But he also wants Western voters to think that their governments are actually acting in the interest of the Palestinian people, because that's what a great many people in those countries want their governments to do, especially after 22 months of genocide. It's all just theater, folks. So when you hear Netanyahu berating some Western leader for engaging in some, cosmetic, adopting some cosmetic measure to address the profound suffering of the Palestinian people, that's what's really going on. It isn't sincere, not in my opinion at any rate. So that's all I have to share with you today, folks. Tomorrow I will be interviewing John Helmer, the longest serving foreign correspondent in Moscow. He's been on our program several times. We're going to be talking about the lunatic Trump's decision to send a couple of nuclear powered submarines to areas closer to the Russian Federation. And we're going to be talking about discussions that Vladimir Putin has had recently with the war criminal Netanyahu, and also about military cooperation between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Russian Federation. And we'll have a lot more to report to you in the days ahead. For now, this is Dimitri Lascaris signing off. I've just happened to arrive, as a matter of fact, at Kalamata, Greece on August 2nd, 2025.